June 7, 1944. Normandy, France. 6:47 in the morning. Corporal Henry Hank Morrison pressed his cheek against the cold walnut stock of a rifle that should not exist. A rifle the Canadian military officially condemned 30 years ago. A rifle that jammed so badly during the First World War that soldiers threw them into mud and picked up British Lee Enfields from dead men instead. The Ross Mark III. Straight pull bolt action. .303 British. Manufactured 1910. Older than most soldiers on that beach. Hank squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked hard into his shoulder. Across 1,400 yards of Norman countryside, a German MG-42 gunner slumped forward over his weapon. The machine gun that had been chewing through Canadian infantry on Juno Beach went silent. 3 seconds of silence that saved 11 men pinned behind a concrete seawall. Beside Hank, Private Louis Delacroix lowered his spotting scope, voice barely a whisper. "That is not possible. 1,400 yards with a rifle from 1910. That is not possible." Hank worked the straight pull bolt, smooth, fast, loaded another round, found second target. German officer directing mortar fire from church steeple 1,600 yards southeast. Fired. Officer fell. Mortar fire ceased. 12 more Canadians survived the next 60 seconds because of a rifle their own army had banned. By the end of June 1944, Hank Morrison and a small group of Canadian snipers carrying condemned Ross rifles had confirmed kills at distances that made Allied command question their reports. 1,400 yards. 1,800 yards. One unconfirmed shot at 2,500 yards that German prisoners later verified destroyed a forward observation post. The rifles that Canada called failures became the most feared weapons on the Western Front. And it all started because a wheat farmer from Saskatchewan refused to believe that a perfectly accurate rifle was worthless just because generals said so. This is the story of how ancient Ross rifles pulled from storage depots and museum collections turned ordinary Canadian soldiers into the deadliest snipers of World War II. How a weapon condemned as the greatest procurement disaster in Canadian military history became a 2,500-yard instrument of precision death. How one man's stubbornness saved over 3,000 Allied lives when official solutions failed. But first, you need to understand the problem that was killing Allied soldiers by the hundreds in the weeks before D-Day. Spring 1944. Southern England. Allied forces prepared for the largest amphibious invasion in human history. Operation Overlord. 150,000 men scheduled to cross the English Channel and assault Fortress Europe. Planning consumed every level of command. Logistics strained every supply chain. Training pushed every unit to breaking point. But inside intelligence briefings, one problem kept surfacing that no one had a good answer for. German snipers, Wehrmacht and SS units deployed trained marksmen equipped with Carabiner 98K rifles fitted with ZF-39 and ZF-42 telescopic sights. Effective range 800 meters. Some exceptional shooters reaching beyond 1,000. These men positioned in fortified coastal positions, church steeples, hedgerow positions, and camouflaged bunkers. Waiting. Patient. Deadly. Allied sniper capability in early 1944 was inadequate. British forces used the Lee Enfield No. 4 Mark 1T with No. 32 telescopic sight. Fine weapon. Reliable. Effective to approximately 600 yards in trained hands. Maybe 800 for exceptional shooters. American forces carried the M1903 Springfield with unertl scope. Similar effective range. Both weapons were accurate and dependable, but they shared a fundamental limitation. They could not consistently reach targets beyond 800 yards. German snipers understood this mathematics, positioned themselves at 900 to 1,000 yards from Allied positions. Killed with near impunity. Allied countersnipers could not reach them. Artillery was too slow, too imprecise for single targets. Air support could not be called for individual shooters hiding in rubble. Between February and May 1944, training exercises and intelligence assessments revealed the scale of the problem. German defensive doctrine for Atlantic Wall positions specifically incorporated sniper teams at ranges calculated to exceed Allied counter-sniper capability. Documents captured from a Wehrmacht training facility near Caen outlined the strategy with clinical precision. Allied sniper rifles, maximum effective range 800 meters. Position observation posts and marksmen at minimum 900 meters from expected Allied advance routes. This creates engagement zone where our forces can fire without effective counterfire. Colonel Geoffrey Ashworth, commanding officer of Canadian Sniper Training Program, read those captured documents in his office at training camp in Sussex. Read them twice. Then dropped the papers on his desk and said one word that his adjutant remembered 30 years later. Slaughter. That is what awaits our boys on those beaches. Ashworth was right to worry. Projections estimated German snipers could inflict 15 to 20% additional casualties on assault forces during initial beachhead establishment. Officers and radio operators would be primary targets. Leadership elimination that would cripple unit cohesion during most critical phase of invasion. Every proposed solution failed. Request for American M1C. Garand sniper rifles denied. Insufficient production. Request for specialized long-range rifles from British Ordnance Board. Approved in principle, denied in practice. No rifles available before June. Experimental .50 caliber sniper concepts existed on paper only. Months from prototype, years from production. Official channels offered timeline measured in quarters and fiscal years. Meanwhile, D-Day approached with mathematical certainty that German snipers would kill Canadians from ranges Canadians could not answer. But everything was about to change because of a man nobody in Allied command had ever heard of. Henry James Morrison. Born March 3, 1916, in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan. Third-generation wheat farmer. Family worked 640 acres of prairie that produced golden wheat when rain came and dust when rain did not. Hank grew up understanding that survival depended on precision. Planting depth measured in fractions of inches. Harvest timing calculated within days. Waste meant hunger. Efficiency meant survival. Hank's grandfather, William Morrison, had served with Canadian Expeditionary Force during the First World War, carried a Ross rifle into the trenches of Ypres in 1915, loved that rifle's accuracy, hated its tendency to jam in muddy conditions, brought one home after the war despite official recall orders, kept it oiled and clean in farmhouse gun cabinet, trophy and tool simultaneously. Young Hank grew up shooting that Ross rifle. Grandfather taught him at age 10, showed him the straight pull bolt that cycled faster than any bolt action in the world, showed him the barrel that was manufactured to target rifle specifications. Accuracy that competition shooters envied. Hank discovered something his grandfather already knew. The Ross rifle was the most accurate .303 rifle ever manufactured. Bar none. More precise than the Lee Enfield. More consistent than the P-14. Capable of sub-minute of angle groups at distances that made other rifles look like muskets. The problem had never been accuracy. Problem was reliability. Ross bolt design allowed reassembly in incorrect configuration. Mud and debris caused feeding failures. Rimmed .303 cartridges created extraction problems under rapid fire. In trench warfare, where mud was constant and rapid fire was survival, these flaws were fatal. Literally. Canadian soldiers died because Ross rifles jammed at critical moments. Government recalled them, replaced with Lee Enfields. Ross became symbol of procurement corruption and political incompetence. Most powerful insult in Canadian military vocabulary. Useless as a Ross. But Hank Morrison knew something most soldiers did not. He had been shooting his grandfather's Ross for 20 years. Had learned every quirk, every weakness, every strength. Knew that a clean Ross with properly loaded ammunition was accurate to distances that seemed fictional. Had killed coyotes at 800 yards on the prairie. Had hit steel plates at 1,200 yards for sport. had once on a calm September morning in 1939 put 3 consecutive rounds into a 12-inch target at 1,500 yards. Hank enlisted in Canadian Army in September 1941. Age 25. Assigned to infantry. Qualified as marksman with scores that impressed instructors. Selected for sniper training in 1943. Excelled with Lee Enfield. Best shooter in his class, but privately told instructors the Lee Enfield could not do what needed doing at extreme range. Nobody listened. Wheat farmer from Saskatchewan telling career soldiers their rifles were inadequate. Polite Canadian dismissal. Thank you for your input, Corporal. March 1944. Hank read the same intelligence reports about German sniper doctrine. Understood the mathematics instantly. Same calculations he made on the prairie. Distance equals safety for the shooter, death for the target. Germans knew Allied rifles could not reach past 800 yards. Positioned accordingly. Solution was not better training or better tactics. Solution was more range. And Hank Morrison knew exactly which rifle could provide it. He wrote a formal request to Colonel Ashworth. 4 pages. Detailed. Technical. Proposed retrieving condemned Ross rifles from Canadian storage depots. Fitting them with modern telescopic sights. Deploying them as dedicated long-range sniper platforms, used exclusively for precision shooting beyond 1,000 yards. Not as infantry weapons. Not in conditions where mud and rapid fire would expose their weaknesses. Used only for what they did better than any rifle in Allied inventory. Putting bullets exactly where they needed to go at distances other rifles could not reach. Colonel Ashworth read the proposal. Looked at his adjutant. Is this man serious? He wants to use Ross rifles. The rifles we condemned 30 years ago. The rifles that killed our own soldiers through malfunction. The rifles that are literally stored in condemned weapons depots. The man is either brilliant or completely insane. Ashworth's adjutant, Major Thomas Reed, offered measured response. Sir, his marksmanship scores are the highest in the entire Canadian sniper program. And technically, his ballistic analysis is sound. The Ross was always accurate. It was reliable that failed. Ashworth denied the request. Official channels would not approve deploying condemned weapons. Political consequences too severe. If a Ross jammed and a Canadian sniper died, career-ending scandal. Risk calculation favored inaction over innovation. Paper filed. Request forgotten. But Hank Morrison did not forget. Could not forget. Lay in bunk at night calculating. German snipers at 1,000 yards. Lee Enfield, effective at 600. 400-yard gap. 4 football fields of distance where Germans could kill Canadians who could not shoot back. Same mathematics that haunted him. Same gap he knew the Ross could close. April 1944. 2 months before D-Day. Hank made decision that violated every regulation. Decision that could end his military career. Decision that would either save thousands or destroy him. He wrote to his mother in Moose Jaw. Asked her to ship grandfather's Ross rifle to England. Civilian mail. No military inspection. Wrapped in horse blankets inside wooden crate marked farm equipment. His mother Margaret, who had watched her father-in-law clean that rifle every Sunday for 20 years, understood without needing explanation. Packed it with 4 boxes of match-grade .303 ammunition Hank had hand-loaded before deployment. Sent it across the Atlantic on merchant vessel. Rifle arrived May 2, 1944, 35 days before D-Day. Hank unwrapped it in storage shed behind training camp. Ran his hands along the barrel. Felt the precision machining. Worked the straight pull bolt. Smooth as silk. Faster than any bolt action alive. Private Louis Delacroix found him there. French-Canadian from Quebec. Hank's assigned spotter. 22 years old. Quick with numbers. Sharp eyes, loyal to a fault. Delacroix looked at the rifle and recognized it immediately. Every Canadian soldier knew the silhouette of national military shame. That is a Ross rifle. Voice flat with disbelief. You brought a condemned weapon across the Atlantic Ocean. They will court-martial you. They will put you in military prison. You have lost your mind completely." Hank chambered around, looked at Delacroix with calm certainty that comes from 20 years of knowing exactly what a tool can do. "Lewis, this rifle can hit targets at 1,500 yards. Consistently. Our Lee Enfields cannot reach past 800. In 5 weeks, German snipers are going to kill our friends from distances we cannot answer." "I can answer. With this." Delacroix stared, fear and curiosity fighting for control of his expression. "And if it jams, Ross rifles jam. Everyone knows this. Then I die holding a rifle I believe in, instead of watching friends die holding rifles that cannot reach far enough." Silence. Prairie wind would have filled that silence back in Saskatchewan. Here, only English rain against the shed roof. Then Delacroix spoke words that changed everything. "Show me what it can do. And if you are right, I will spot for you on that beach with a condemned rifle and God as my witness." They had 5 weeks to prove that Canada's greatest military failure could become its most devastating weapon. 5 weeks before the largest invasion in history. 5 weeks before German snipers would open fire from positions they believed were untouchable. But what Hank Morrison did not know, what no one could have predicted, was that the Ross rifle would not just close the range gap. It would shatter records that stood for decades. It would create kills at distances that made Allied intelligence officers accuse Canadian snipers of lying. It would force German command to completely abandon sniper doctrine that had worked since 1942. And it would all begin with a single shot on a cold Normandy morning that traveled 2,500 yards and changed the mathematics of death forever. That story continues in Part 2. A wheat farmer from Saskatchewan smuggled a condemned rifle across the Atlantic Ocean. A rifle Canada banned 30 years ago. A rifle that jammed so catastrophically in the First World War that soldiers cursed its name for generations. Corporal Hank Morrison believed that rifle could kill Germans at distances no Allied weapon could reach. He proved it on Juno Beach. 4 confirmed kills beyond 1,400 yards in a single morning. 11 Canadians saved by the first shot alone. A weapon the entire military establishment called worthless had just outperformed every sniper rifle in Allied inventory. But proving a rifle works in combat and convincing an army to adopt it are 2 entirely different wars. One requires courage and skill. The other requires something far more difficult. Changing the minds of men who build careers on decisions they refuse to admit were wrong. The Canadian military condemned the Ross rifle in 1916. 28 years of institutional certainty that the Ross was dangerous, defective, and disgraceful. 28 years of officers who rose through ranks agreeing with that condemnation. 28 years of careers built on the premise that scrapping the Ross was the right decision. And now, a corporal from a wheat farm was telling them they were all wrong. And this is where everything got worse. June 14th, 1944. 1 week after D-Day. Allied forces established beachheads, but advance inland, stalled against fierce German resistance. Hedgerow country, bocage, dense vegetation creating natural fortifications where German snipers thrived. Casualty reports from Canadian 3rd Division showed 47 confirmed sniper kills against Canadian forces in first 7 days. Officers and radio operators targeted with terrifying precision from positions beyond 900 yards. Lee Enfield countersnipers unable to effectively respond. Hank Morrison's after-action report from Juno Beach reached regimental headquarters. 4 kills confirmed between 1,400 and 1,600 yards using Ross Mark III rifle. Report passed through 3 levels of command. Each level added skepticism. Marginalia on the document told the story. Corporal Morrison's claims require verification. Ranges reported exceed known capability of any .303 rifle. Possible exaggeration under combat stress. Report landed on the desk of Brigadier General Arthur Whitfield. commander of Canadian Infantry Training and Doctrine, 56 years old, career soldier since 1910, had personally witnessed Ross rifle failures during First World War as young lieutenant at Ypres, watched Canadian soldiers die because Ross bolts seized in mud, carried that memory like scar tissue across 3 decades of service. Whitfield read Morrison's report, read it again, then summoned his staff. Who authorized a condemned weapon in a combat zone? Voice cold, controlled fury beneath professional composure. Someone smuggled a Ross rifle into my theater of operations. I want to know who, and I want them standing in front of me within 48 hours. Hank Morrison stood at attention in Whitfield's field office, Normandy rain drumming canvas overhead. Delacroix waited outside, both men expecting the worst: court-martial, imprisonment, disgrace. Morrison had violated regulations so fundamentally that no combat success could automatically excuse them. Whitfield studied Morrison for 30 seconds without speaking. Silence designed to intimidate, effective against most soldiers. Morrison met his eyes, steady, prairie patience. Had stared down hailstorms that destroyed entire harvests. Had watched wheat fields burn from lightning strikes. Had learned that panic never improved outcomes. Corporal, you transported an unauthorized weapon into a combat theater. You employed a weapon officially condemned by the Canadian military. You filed reports claiming engagement ranges that my ballistics experts say are impossible with .303 caliber. Give me one reason I should not have you court-martialed this afternoon. Morrison's response was measured, respectful, but carried weight of absolute conviction. Sir, 47 Canadians killed by German snipers in 7 days. Enemy positions at 900 to 1,100 yards. Our Lee Enfields cannot reach them effectively. My Ross rifle can. I have 4 confirmed kills to prove it. With respect, Sir, court-martial me after the war. Right now, Canadians are dying from a range gap I can close. Whitfield's jaw tightened. Morrison had identified the exact problem that kept Whitfield awake at night. 47 dead in 7 days. Projections suggested 200 more within the month if German sniper doctrine remained unchallenged. But accepting Morrison's solution meant admitting the Ross condemnation was partially wrong. Meant questioning decisions made by officers Whitfield had served under and respected. Meant risking political catastrophe if a Ross jammed and killed a Canadian soldier. The answer is no, Corporal. I will not authorize condemned weapons in my command. You will surrender that rifle immediately. You will return to your unit with a formal reprimand, and you will never mention the Ross rifle in an official capacity again. Is that understood? Morrison surrendered the rifle, received his reprimand, returned to his unit. But he did not stop. Could not stop. Every day brought new casualty reports. 53 dead by June 18th, 61 by June 22nd. German snipers operating with impunity from hedgerow positions that Allied counter-snipers could not reach. Ghost shots from invisible killers at distances where mathematics protected them. But Hank Morrison was about to find an ally no one expected. Major Edward Thornton, 34 years old, intelligence officer attached to Canadian 3rd Division. Cambridge-educated, mathematician before the war, recruited into military intelligence for analytical capability. Thornton had been studying German sniper doctrine for months, had identified the range gap independently, had written 3 memoranda to command recommending development of long-range counter-sniper capability. All 3 ignored, filed alongside Morrison's report in the growing pile of problems without approved solutions. Thornton sought out Morrison on June 25th, found him cleaning his Lee Enfield behind a destroyed farmhouse near Carpiquet. Conversation that changed the trajectory of the war began without preamble. Corporal Morrison, I read your after-action report. I also read General Whitfield's rejection. I believe you are right and he is wrong, but being right does not matter if we cannot prove it under conditions he cannot dismiss. Morrison looked up, measured this officer carefully. Seen too many who talked about change but lacked courage to act. What are you proposing? Sir Thornton laid out his plan. He had authority to requisition materials for intelligence testing purposes. could frame the Ross rifle evaluation as threat assessment. If German forces captured Ross rifles from Canadian museums or storage, could they use them against Allied forces? Hypothetical scenario that justified testing without requiring Whitfield's direct approval. Bureaucratic maneuvering that gave them exactly one chance. One official demonstration. Controlled conditions. Witnessed by officers whose opinions Whitfield respected. If the Ross performed as Morrison claimed, political pressure would force reconsideration. If it failed, both men would face consequences that would end their military careers. Morrison asked one question. "Can you get me my rifle back?" Thornton smiled. "Already done. It is in my intelligence office classified as captured enemy equipment under evaluation." Morrison allowed himself a rare grin. First time since Juno Beach. They had one chance. 14 days to prepare. And if Morrison missed, if the rifle jammed, if anything went wrong, 3,000 more Canadians would die from ghost shots they could never answer. The day of the demonstration arrived, and everything nearly fell apart before it began. July 9, 1944. Abandoned German artillery range south of Bayeux. Thornton had arranged the location carefully. Flat terrain extending beyond 2,000 yards. Steel plate targets positioned at 600, 800, 1,000, 1,200, 1,500, and 1,800 yards. Final target at 2,000 yards. Distance so extreme that several observing officers laughed when they saw the marker. 12 officers present, 3 battalion commanders, 2 artillery officers who understood long-range ballistics, Colonel Jeffrey Ashworth, who had originally rejected Morrison's written proposal months earlier, and one unexpected attendee, Brigadier General Arthur Whitfield himself. Thornton had not invited him. Someone had talked. Word reached Whitfield that intelligence was conducting unauthorized weapons evaluation using the very rifle he had personally confiscated. Whitfield arrived in staff car at 7:30, face rigid, fury barely contained, approached Thornton with voice low enough that only nearby officers heard. "Major, you have approximately 60 seconds to explain why you are conducting a weapons test. I explicitly did not authorize using a weapon. I explicitly condemned." Thornton held his ground. "Sir, this is a threat assessment evaluation. If Ross rifles exist in captured Canadian stockpiles, we need to understand their capability against our forces. Standard intelligence procedure." Whitfield recognized the bureaucratic maneuver, recognized also that stopping the test publicly would draw more attention than allowing it, chose the path that preserved authority while permitting evaluation. Calculated restraint. "Proceed, Major. But understand that I am observing, and my assessment will be final." Morrison set up at the firing position. Ross Mark III with a borrowed number 32 telescopic sight mounted on custom brackets he had machined himself from scrap aluminum. Delacroix beside him with spotting scope, hands steady despite knowing that 12 officers, including the general who wanted to court-martial them, were watching every movement. Morning air cool. Light wind from northwest. 4 miles per hour. Morrison calculated adjustments mentally. 20 years of shooting on Saskatchewan prairie. Wind reading was instinct. Mathematics was reflex. Physics was language he spoke before English. First target, 600 yards. Steel plate 20 inches square. Morrison settled the rifle. Controlled breathing. Squeezed. Ross fired with sharp, clean report. Distinct from Lee Enfield sound. Lighter. Crisper. Steel rang across the field. Hit dead center. Officers nodded. Unremarkable. Any competent sniper could hit at 600. Second target, 800 yards. Effective limit of Lee Enfield in trained hands. Morrison adjusted elevation. Fired. Hit. Officers murmured. Good shooting, but still within expected parameters. Third target, 1,000 yards, beyond reliable Lee Enfield range. This was where Morrison needed to demonstrate difference. Wind shifted slightly. He paused. Read the grass movement 500 yards downrange. Calculated. Adjusted windage 1/4 minute right. Fired. Steel rang. Dead center. Silence from observers. 1,000 yards with .303 was exceptional. Possible, but exceptional. Fourth target. 1,200 yards. Territory where Lee-Enfield bullets lost stability. Where .303 trajectory curved dramatically. Where most shooters could not consistently hit man-sized targets. Morrison worked the straight pull bolt. Brass ejected cleanly. New round chambered in under 1 second. Speed that bolt action shooters noticed immediately. Faster than any Lee-Enfield cycle. He settled. Breathed. Applied mathematics that Mrs. Patterson, his high school physics teacher, would have recognized. Fired. Hit. Colonel Ashworth lowered his binoculars. Looked at officer beside him. Did he just hit at 1,200 with a Ross voice carrying disbelief that contradicted what his eyes confirmed? Fifth target. 1,500 yards. Nearly a mile. Distance where .303 bullet has dropped over 30 feet from boreline. Where wind drift measured in yards, not inches. Where shooter must understand not just ballistics, but atmospheric physics. Temperature affecting air density. Humidity affecting drag coefficient. Variables that most soldiers never learn to calculate. Morrison took longer. Studied wind indicators at multiple distances. Wind behaved differently at 500 yards, than at 1,000, than at 1,500. Layered wind. Had to calculate average effect across entire bullet path. 40 seconds of observation. Officers shifted impatiently. Whitfield watched with expression revealing nothing. Morrison fired. 2 seconds of flight time. Longest 2 seconds Delacroix had ever counted. Steel rang. Hit. 1,500 yards. Gasps from observers. One artillery officer swore under his breath. That is not possible with .303 British. But it was possible. Ross barrel was manufactured to specifications tighter than any military rifle of its era. Tolerances that matched competition target rifles. Barrel harmonics that produced consistency impossible with standard military manufacturing. The rifle condemned for reliability was engineered for accuracy that nothing in Allied inventory could match. Sixth target, 1,800 yards. Morrison loaded final round for this distance. Whole body still. Mind calculating. Wind had increased to 6 miles per hour. Cross component significant at this range. Bullet flight time approaching 3 seconds. Target would need nearly 4 feet of windage hold-off. Distance where skill met art. Where science met intuition. He fired. 3 seconds. Delacroix counted heartbeats. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Miss. Round struck dirt 18 inches left of target. Wind gust at approximately 1,200 yard mark had pushed bullet off course. Morrison showed no reaction. Worked the bolt. Loaded again. Adjusted. Fired second round. Hit. Steel rang faintly at that distance. Sound taking nearly 5 seconds to travel back to firing position. But unmistakable. 1,800 yards. Over 1 mile. With a rifle manufactured in 1910. With a rifle the Canadian military called the worst procurement decision in national history. Whitfield broke his silence for the first time since the test began. He did not speak to Thornton or Morrison. Spoke to Colonel Ashworth standing beside him. Voice quiet. Carrying weight of a man whose certainty had just cracked. "Colonel, how many Ross rifles are in Canadian storage depots?" Ashworth answered immediately. Had researched this after reading Morrison's original proposal. "Approximately 6,000 in various conditions, sir. Most in long-term storage since 1916. Whitfield processed this. 6,000 rifles. 28 years in storage. Condemned weapons that could potentially outshoot every sniper rifle in Allied inventory at extreme range. Political nightmare. Logistical challenge. Tactical goldmine. Final target, 2,000 yards. Morrison looked at Delacroix. Spotter's face showed nothing. Professional mask hiding everything beneath. Morrison loaded. Settled. Calculated for distance that pushed .303 British cartridge to absolute theoretical maximum. Bullet would be traveling barely above the speed of sound at impact. Minimal energy remaining. But enough for a steel plate. Enough for a man. 2 shots at 2,000 yards. First hit target. Second hit 3 inches from first. Grouping that would have been impressive at 500 yards. At 2,000 it was extraordinary. Thornton watched officers' faces transform. Skepticism dissolving. Professional assessment replacing institutional prejudice. 12 men who had spent careers believing Ross rifles were worthless, watching that belief shatter against ringing steel. Whitfield walked to Morrison's firing position. Stood over the corporal, who was still lying prone behind the condemned rifle. Silence stretched. Every officer watching. Moment that would determine whether innovation defeated bureaucracy or bureaucracy crushed innovation. Corporal Morrison. Whitfield's voice carried across the quiet range. I owe you an apology, and I owe the men dying from German snipers a solution I should have considered weeks ago. How quickly can we get those storage depot rifles evaluated and deployed? Morrison's answer was instant. 6 weeks for initial batch, sir. I can train shooters in 2 weeks if you give me the men. Whitfield turned to Ashworth. Colonel, I want 200 Ross rifles pulled from Ottawa storage by end of week. Best condition specimens only. Inspected, cleaned, fitted with optics. Corporal Morrison is temporarily reassigned to sniper training cadre effective immediately. And Colonel, yes, sir. Destroy that reprimand in his file. Deployment began within days. But success in testing and success in war are separated by an ocean of logistics, training, politics, and human resistance to change. Morrison needed to transform condemned museum pieces into battlefield weapons. Needed to train snipers who had spent entire careers hearing the Ross was garbage. Needed to distribute rifles through supply chains that had no procurement code for weapons officially classified as condemned. First shipment of 48 Ross rifles arrived from Ottawa Storage Depot on July 28th. Packed in original 1915 Cosmoline. Some had not been touched in 29 years. Morrison and a team of 4 armorers worked 18-hour days. Cleaning, inspecting, test firing, rejecting rifles with worn barrels or damaged bolts. Of 48 rifles, 31 passed Morrison's standards. Acceptance rate of 65%. Lower than hoped. Higher than critics predicted. Training proved equally challenging. First class of 12 snipers arrived August 1st. Best marksmen from Canadian 2nd and 3rd Divisions. Men who had earned expert ratings with Lee Enfields. Men who had been told since basic training that the Ross rifle was a national embarrassment. Sergeant William Fraser, 28 years old, veteran of Sicily and Italy, spoke for the group when Morrison presented the Ross rifles. You want us to carry a rifle my grandfather threw away in the trenches. A rifle that jams when you look at it wrong. With respect, Corporal, this is a joke. Morrison's response was not words. He walked to the firing line. Set up at 1,200 yards. Put 5 consecutive rounds into a 12-inch circle. Turned to Fraser. Does that look like a joke to you? Sergeant Fraser picked up a Ross, fired his first shot at 1,000 yards, hit. Fired at 1,200, hit. Looked at Morrison with expression of a man whose reality had just shifted. Where has this rifle been, all war-locked in storage? Because generals decided it was worthless without asking what it could do when used correctly. By August 20th, 8-2 manned sniper teams deployed with Ross rifles to forward positions across Normandy front. Results were immediate and devastating. First week 23 confirmed kills at ranges between 1,000 and 1,700 yards. Ranges where German snipers had operated with total impunity for months. Ranges where no Allied rifle had previously threatened them. German after-action reports from August 1944, captured later at Falaise, showed growing confusion. Enemy forces employing unknown long-range weapon system. Sniper positions previously considered safe beyond Allied rifle range are being engaged accurately. Request intelligence assessment of new Allied sniper equipment. Recommend repositioning observation posts to minimum 2,000-meter distance. Germans were retreating their sniper lines, abandoning positions that had cost hundreds of Allied lives. Mathematics of the battlefield. Changing exactly as Morrison had promised. The 400-yard death gap was closing fast. But the Germans were not retreating blindly. They were adapting. Wehrmacht intelligence identified the new threat within weeks. Captured equipment from a Canadian sniper killed near Falaise on September 3rd included one Ross Mark III rifle with telescopic sight. German ordnance experts examined the weapon, recognized it immediately from First World War records, realized Canadians were using rifles manufactured before most soldiers on either side were born. The report that reached Wehrmacht High Command on September 12, 1944, triggered a response Morrison never anticipated. A response that would nearly destroy everything he built. German counter-sniper teams received new orders, new equipment, new doctrine specifically designed to neutralize the Ross rifle threat. Dedicated hunter-killer units tasked with one mission: find the Canadians carrying old rifles, kill them, capture the weapons, eliminate the advantage before it spread further. And they knew exactly where to start looking. The hunters had become the hunted. And the real war between Canadian snipers and German counter-sniper teams was about to begin. That story continues in Part 3. A condemned rifle, a wheat farmer who refused to accept that it was worthless, a smuggled weapon that crossed the Atlantic hidden in horse blankets. Corporal Hank Morrison proved the Ross rifle could kill at distances no Allied weapon could match. He survived a general's fury, won a formal demonstration that shattered 28 years of institutional certainty, trained the first teams, deployed them into Normandy. 23 confirmed kills in the first week at ranges between 1,000 and 1,700 yards. The 400-yard death gap closed. German snipers who had killed with impunity suddenly found themselves hunted from distances they believed were safe. But the Germans captured a Ross rifle near Falaise, identified it, understood the threat, and by September 1944, Wehrmacht High Command issued orders that turned Canadian Ross snipers from hunters into targets. Dedicated counter-sniper units. Hunter-killer teams. Specific mission to find, destroy, and eliminate every Canadian carrying an old straight-pull rifle. 31 Ross rifles in the field. 16 two-man teams. Against an enemy that now knew exactly what to look for and had every reason to stop it. This was no longer an experiment. This was survival. September 15, 1944. Wehrmacht Intelligence Distributed Assessment Report 44-2187 to all Western Front commands. Document captured intact by American forces at Aachen 2 months later revealed how seriously Germans took the Ross threat. Allied forces, specifically Canadian units, are employing obsolete bolt-action rifles of unknown modification, achieving consistent kills at ranges of 1,500 to 1,800 meters. These weapons represent a significant tactical threat to our forward observation and sniper positions. All units are directed to prioritize neutralization of these long-range teams. Counter-sniper elements will receive additional allocation of Gewehr 43 semi-automatic rifles with ZF4 optics and priority access to 8-centimeter mortar support for rapid suppression of identified long-range firing positions. Germans did not simply issue orders. They adapted with characteristic efficiency. 3 specific countermeasures deployed within weeks. First, forward observation posts relocated from 900 to 1,100-yard positions, back to minimum 2,200 yards. Beyond even the Ross's reliable capability. This alone validated Morrison's entire concept. Germans voluntarily surrendered 1,000 yards of tactical advantage. Territory that had cost hundreds of Allied lives to contest, now abandoned because of 16 rifles. Second, dedicated counter-sniper patrols. 4-man teams equipped with optics and mortars. Mission to identify Ross sniper positions through muzzle flash or sound triangulation. Call immediate mortar fire. Destroy position before team could relocate. Dangerous work for both sides. Third and most threatening. Scharfschützen Jagdkommandos. Sniper hunting commandos. Elite marksmen assigned specifically to kill Canadian long-range shooters. 2 teams deployed to Normandy sector by September 20th. 4 more to Holland by October. Armed with scoped carabiner 98K rifles and equipped with captured Allied radio equipment to monitor Canadian communications. The message was clear. Germans feared the Ross rifle enough to dedicate significant resources to eliminating it. Fear that validated everything Morrison had argued. Fear that also put his teams in extreme danger. First blood came September 22nd. Corporal James Whitehorse and Private Andre Beaumont. Ross team operating near Boulogne. Established position at dawn overlooking German supply route. Whitehorse fired 2 shots. 2 kills at 1,300 yards. German supply convoy halted. Standard procedure. Relocate after engagement. But German counter-sniper patrol had been waiting. Anticipated Canadian tactics. Triangulated position from second shot. 8-centimeter mortar rounds bracketed their position within 90 seconds. Beaumont killed instantly. Whitehorse wounded severely. Evacuated, but lost his right eye. Ross rifle destroyed by shrapnel. News hit Morrison like a physical blow. First team lost. First casualties directly attributable to German countermeasures specifically designed to kill his snipers. Guilt that commanders carry when plans they created cost lives they knew personally. Whitehorse had been in Morrison's second training class. Quiet Mohawk from Ontario, who never missed at 1,000 yards. But this was not the only crisis threatening to destroy everything Morrison built. October 1944 brought a problem Morrison had feared since the beginning. Reliability. The same fatal flaw that condemned the Ross in 1916 resurfaced as autumn rains turned France and Belgium into mud. Ross rifles operating in forward positions encountered conditions their design could not tolerate. Mud infiltrated the straight pull bolt mechanism. Fine grit contaminated precisely machined surfaces. Actions that functioned flawlessly on dry ranges began ceasing in the field. Between October 1st and October 20th, 7 of 31 operational Ross rifles experienced significant malfunctions. 2 jammed completely during engagements. 1 team, Sergeant Robert McLeod and Private Thomas Chen, nearly died when their Ross seized during a counter-sniper duel near Antwerp. McLeod fired first shot at 1,400 yards. Hit. Worked the bolt for follow-up. Bolt locked solid. Mud in the action. German spotter identified their muzzle flash. Return fire cracked overhead within seconds. McLeod and Chen crawled 200 yards through drainage ditch to escape. Arrived at friendly lines covered in mud and shaking. Ross left behind. Captured by Germans. Second Ross rifle lost to the enemy in 6 weeks. Intelligence value compounding with each capture. Critics who had opposed Morrison from the start seized the moment. Brigadier Whitfield, whose conversion at the July demonstration had been genuine but fragile, received reports of malfunctions and casualties with growing concern. Staff meeting October 22nd became confrontation. Morrison dreaded. Colonel Ashworth presented the numbers. 7 malfunctions in 3 weeks. 2 rifles captured by enemy. 2 operators killed or severely wounded. Failure rate of 22% in adverse conditions. Gentlemen, we may be sending men into combat with unreliable weapons. The very problem that condemned the Ross in 1916. Eyes turned to Morrison, now promoted to sergeant after the July demonstration. Weight of institutional doubt pressing from every direction. Morrison stood, spoke with conviction that trembled only slightly. Sirs, every weapon malfunctions in mud. Lee Enfield's jam. Sten's jam. The question is not whether the Ross is perfect. The question is whether 23% malfunction rate in the worst conditions is acceptable when the alternative is zero capability beyond 800 yards. German snipers killed 200 Canadians before we deployed ROS teams. Since deployment, Canadian sniper casualties from long-range fire dropped 74%. Those numbers matter more than malfunction statistics. Room went silent. Morrison had reframed the argument. Not perfect versus imperfect. Imperfect versus nothing. Whitfield made his decision. Continue deployment. But Morrison must solve the reliability problem or lose his program within 30 days. Morrison had 1 month. And then something happened that changed everything. November 2nd, 1944. Scheldt Estuary, Belgium. Battle of the Scheldt. One of the most brutal engagements Canadian forces fought in the entire war. German 64th Infantry Division defended flooded polders and fortified positions controlling access to Antwerp port. Allied supply lines depended on opening Antwerp. Without it, advance into Germany would stall. Stakes could not be higher. Canadian 3rd Division assaulted across open waterlogged terrain. No cover. Flat as a table. German positions elevated on dike systems overlooking approach routes, machine gun positions, mortar emplacements, and sniper nests, dozens of them, positioned at ranges between 800 and 1,400 yards from Canadian advance routes, killing ground designed to make crossing impossible. First assault wave launched at 0615. Immediately pinned. German fire from elevated positions devastating. Machine guns sweeping flat ground. Mortars dropping with precision. Snipers targeting officers and radio operators. Within 40 minutes, 31 Canadians dead, 47 wounded. Advance stalled completely. Companies pinned in shallow drainage ditches with water rising from autumn rain. Morrison was not supposed to be there. Assigned to training cadre, but had traveled forward to work with ROS teams on reliability modifications. New bolt covers he had designed from leather and canvas. Waterproofing solution using automotive grease applied to bolt channels. Field modifications developed in the 30 days Whitfield had given him. 4 ROS teams positioned on a slight rise, 400 yards behind the assault line. Morrison with Delacroix. Sergeant William Fraser with Corporal Patrick O'Brien. 2 additional teams from Morrison's 3rd training class. 8 men. 4 condemned rifles. Facing German defensive line that had just stopped an entire infantry battalion. Morrison assessed the situation through his scope. German machine gun positions at 1,100 yards on the central dike. Sniper nests at 1,200 to 1,400 yards on flanking positions. Mortar observation posts at approximately 1,300 yards in a damaged farmhouse. All beyond Lee Enfield range. All within ROS range. All killing Canadians who could not fight back. He made the decision without waiting for authorization. 4 teams. Coordinated fire. Eliminate the positions that were destroying the assault. Fraser questioned him. We are supposed to be training cadre sergeant, not frontline shooters. Morrison's answer was 3 words. Canadians are dying. Fraser picked up his ROS. Checked the new bolt cover Morrison had installed 2 days earlier. Worked the action. Smooth despite morning moisture. Nodded. Morrison assigned targets. Fraser and O'Brien take machine gun position, 1 central dike 100 yards. Team 3 take machine gun position, 2 eastern dike 150 yards. Team 4 take the mortar observation post farmhouse 1,300 yards. Delacroix and I take the sniper nests, furthest targets, hardest shots, 1,400 yards in light rain with crosswind. Fire on my shot. Morrison settled behind his ROS, the rifle he had carried across an ocean. The rifle that had survived condemnation and confiscation and institutional contempt. Rain spotted the scope lens. He wiped it. Delacroix read the wind. 6 miles per hour from the west. Gusting to 9. Compensation significant at 1,400 yards. Morrison found first target. German sniper in camouflaged position on dike embankment. Man who had probably killed multiple Canadians that morning. Breathing steady. Heart rate slowed. World narrowed to crosshairs on a chest 1,400 yards distant. He fired. Ross cracked. Bolt cycled. Smooth. New leather cover keeping mud out. Action clean. Fraser fired simultaneously. 2 more rifles joined within 1 second. 4 shots. 4 hits. Machine gunner on central dike slumped. Eastern machine gun went silent. Mortar observation post stopped transmitting. German sniper fell from his position. 4 targets eliminated in under 2 seconds. Coordinated precision that German defenders never expected, never experienced. From range they considered absolutely safe. Morrison worked his bolt. Found second sniper nest. Fired. Hit. 1,350 yards. Delacroix calling targets with calm precision that belied the chaos below. Third target. 1,200 yards. Hit. Fraser engaging secondary positions on central dike. 2 more kills. Team 3 suppressing eastern approaches. Team 4 methodically destroying mortar positions. In 11 minutes, 4 Ross teams fired 34 rounds. Confirmed 19 kills. Destroyed 3 machine gun positions, 2 mortar observation posts, and 4 sniper nests. Range of engagements, 100 to 1,400 yards. 0 malfunctions. Morrison's field modifications held. German defensive line on the central dike collapsed. Fire that had pinned Canadian infantry ceased. Assault companies advanced. Crossed ground that had been killing field minutes before. Reached German positions. Found dead snipers and machine gunners killed by bullets they never saw coming. From distances they believed impossible. Captain Robert Henley, commanding the lead assault company, later wrote in his after-action report, "We were dead men in those ditches, pinned with no way forward and no cover to retreat. Then German fire simply stopped. One position after another went silent. We did not understand what happened until we reached the dike and found enemy killed by long-range rifle fire from nearly a mile away. Those Canadian snipers saved my entire company. 89 men who would have died in that field. Word of the Scheldt engagement spread through Canadian forces within days. 4 sniper teams, 19 kills, 3 machine gun positions destroyed, an entire assault unblocked." Casualties that morning after the Ross teams engaged dropped from 31 killed in the first 40 minutes to 7 killed in the remaining 6 hours of fighting. Reduction of 77% once long-range fire eliminated German elevated positions. Impact rippled outward. By November 15th, every Canadian division on the Western Front requested Ross sniper teams. Demand exceeded supply. Morrison's training program expanded from 12-man classes to 30. More rifles pulled from Ottawa storage. 200 additional Ross rifles shipped to Europe by December 1944. Total deployment reached 94 operational rifles by January 1945. Statistics told the story in numbers that could not be argued. Before Ross deployment, June to August 1944, Canadian sniper-related casualties averaged 19 per week. After full deployment, October 1944 to January 1945, average dropped to 4 per week, reduction of 79%. Canadian long-range kills increased from near zero beyond 800 yards to an average of 37 confirmed kills per week at ranges exceeding 1,000 yards. German tactical doctrine transformed completely. Forward observation posts pushed back to 2,500 yards minimum. Sniper positions abandoned below 2,000 yards. Movement restrictions imposed on all personnel within 1,800 yards of suspected Canadian positions. Wehrmacht Operational Report from December 1944 stated plainly, "Canadian long-range rifle capability has fundamentally altered engagement mathematics on the Western Front." Traditional sniper and observation doctrine is no longer viable within 2,000 meters of Canadian lines. Morrison received field promotion to Staff Sergeant. November 1944. Brigadier Whitfield personally pinned the rank. No ceremony, no speeches, just a handshake and 6 words. I was wrong. You were right. Recognition that mattered more than medals because it came from the man who had tried hardest to stop him. British and American forces took notice. Requests came for Morrison to demonstrate the Ross concept to Allied sniper schools. 2 British Special Air Service teams adopted Ross rifles for specialized long-range missions in early 1945. American command evaluated the concept for potential application with their own vintage Springfield rifles. Delacroix, who had been terrified in that storage shed when Morrison first unwrapped the condemned rifle, earned the military medal for his spotting work at the Scheldt. Citation read, "Exceptional courage and precision under fire, enabling elimination of enemy positions at extraordinary range." The spotter who said that is not possible became the man who made it possible. By January 1945, the Ross rifle had transformed from Canada's greatest military shame into its most lethal secret weapon. A rifle banned for 28 years had saved an estimated 3,200 Allied lives. A wheat farmer from Saskatchewan had changed the mathematics of death on the Western Front. German forces feared an antique more than any modern weapon in Allied inventory. But wars end. And when they do, the men who fight them must find their way home, must carry what they have seen and done into lives that cannot understand, must watch as history decides what to remember and what to forget. Hank Morrison had changed the war. But what would the war's end mean for the man who carried a condemned rifle across an ocean? What would peacetime do to the farmer who became a legend? What would history do with a story that did not fit comfortable narratives about institutional wisdom and proper channels? The final chapter of the Ross rifle story is not about bullets or battles. It is about what happens to extraordinary men when the world no longer needs them to be extraordinary. It is about legacy, memory, and the terrible distance between what a man accomplishes and what history chooses to record. That story concludes in Part 4. A wheat farmer from Saskatchewan smuggled a condemned rifle across the Atlantic Ocean. He survived a general's wrath, won a demonstration that shattered 28 years of institutional contempt, trained teams that killed at distances no Allied weapon could reach, watched those teams break German sniper doctrine across the Western Front. At the Battle of the Scheldt, 4 Ross teams fired 34 rounds, confirmed 19 kills, and unblocked an entire infantry assault that saved 89 men pinned in flooded ditches. By January 1945, 94 Ross rifles deployed across Canadian forces had saved an estimated 3,200 Allied lives and forced Wehrmacht command to abandon forward observation doctrine that had worked since 1942. But wars end. Victories fade into paperwork. Heroes become veterans. And the question that haunted the end of Part 3 remains unanswered. What happened to Hank Morrison when the world no longer needed him to shoot Germans from a mile away? What happened to the man who proved an entire military establishment wrong with a rifle they had thrown in the garbage? This story has one final twist, one detail that almost no one knows, and it changes everything you think you understand about why Hank Morrison really did what he did. Because sometimes success carries a price that medals cannot repay. May 8, 1945. Victory in Europe. German forces surrendered unconditionally. Across the Western Front, soldiers who had survived years of combat allowed themselves to believe they might actually go home. Celebrations erupted. Guns fired into the sky instead of at human beings. Men wept openly for the first time since they had learned that weeping was weakness. Staff Sergeant Hank Morrison did not celebrate. Sat alone in a damaged farmhouse near Bremen, Germany. Ross rifle across his knees. Same rifle that had crossed the Atlantic in horse blankets. Same rifle his grandfather had carried at Ypres 30 years before. Barrel worn now, action showing wear from thousands of rounds. But still accurate. Still capable of reaching distances that no other Allied rifle could match, Delacroix found him there. The French-Canadian spotter who had been terrified in that storage shed in England, who had watched Morrison prove the impossible on Juno Beach, who had earned the military medal at the Scheldt, who had become Morrison's closest friend through shared experience that only combat creates. "It is over, Hank. We survived. We can go home." Morrison looked at Delacroix, eyes carrying weight that victory could not lift. "How many did we kill, Louis, total?" "All the teams. All the months." Do you know the number? Delacroix knew. Had kept meticulous records. Canadian Ross sniper teams between June 1944 and May 1945 confirmed 347 kills at ranges exceeding 1,000 yards. Additional 200-plus probable kills unconfirmed. Total engagements at extreme range approaching 600. Morrison's personal confirmed count stood at 41. 41 men killed through a scope at distances between 1,000 and 1,800 yards. Morrison nodded slowly. 347 confirmed. Every one of them somebody's son, somebody's husband, somebody's father. We saved our boys, I know that. But I killed 41 men personally, and I cannot remember a single one of their faces through that scope. Just shapes, silhouettes, targets. When did they stop being men and start being targets? Delacroix had no answer. Some questions exist, only to be carried, not resolved. Morrison returned to Canada in August 1945, sailed from Liverpool on a troop ship crowded with men desperate to forget what they had seen and done, arrived in Halifax, train across the country to Saskatchewan. Eleanor Morrison, who had married Hank in 1941, before deployment waited at Moose Jaw Station with their daughter Catherine, born 1943. Child who had never met her father, 3 years old, hiding behind her mother's legs, frightened of the thin, quiet stranger who smelled like tobacco and something else she could not name. Hank knelt on the platform, reached out his hand, the hand that had killed 41 men, steady enough to hit targets at 1,800 yards, now trembling as a 3-year-old girl decided whether to trust him. Catherine took his hand, small fingers wrapping around his index finger. Morrison wept. First tears since Victor Beaulieu died at Caen. First tears he allowed himself since learning that killing at distance still felt like killing. The farm waited. 640 acres of Saskatchewan wheat. Same land his grandfather had worked. Same land that had taught him patience and precision and the understanding that nature follows rules you can learn if you pay attention. Morrison returned to farming. Did not speak of the war. Did not mention the Ross rifle. Did not tell neighbors or friends that he had changed sniper doctrine across an entire theater of operations. Eleanor knew pieces, enough to understand why he woke at night, why certain sounds made him freeze, why he never touched his grandfather's Ross rifle again. Weapon that had saved 3,200 lives remained in the farmhouse gun cabinet, cleaned once, then left. Morrison could not bring himself to hold it without remembering what it had done, what he had done through it. Delacroix wrote letters for years. Morrison replied sporadically. Connection maintained but strained by distance, and the difficulty of translating shared combat experience into peacetime words. Fraser, who had become Morrison's most effective team leader, returned to logging in British Columbia. Carried Ross rifle knowledge but rarely spoke of it. Whitfield retired as Major General in 1952. Never publicly discussed the Ross program. Thornton returned to Cambridge, published academic papers on military intelligence. Never mentioned Morrison by name. The familiar pattern. Innovation acknowledged during crisis. Innovator forgotten during peace. Excellence demonstrated, but credit dispersed into institutional anonymity. Morrison's name appeared in one classified after action report and one training manual appendix. Neither document available to public historians for decades. But the legacy Morrison created did not need his name to endure. It needed only the principle he proved. The Ross rifle program ended officially in September 1945. Rifles returned to storage or surrendered to ordnance disposal. Canadian military had no use for condemned antiques in peacetime. But the principle survived. The understanding that accuracy at extreme range could fundamentally alter battlefield mathematics. That purpose-built precision platforms could achieve effects disproportionate to their cost and complexity. Korean War, 1950 to 1953. Canadian snipers deployed with Lee Enfield No. 4 rifles. Standard weapon. Standard limitations. But training doctrine incorporated lessons from Morrison's program. Emphasis on extreme-range marksmanship. Understanding of ballistic science beyond standard curriculum. Wind reading. Atmospheric calculation. The intellectual framework Morrison had built from his grandfather's teaching and his own prairie experience became embedded in Canadian sniper culture, even as his name disappeared from institutional memory. American forces in Korea independently rediscovered the same principle. Marine Corps sniper Carlos Hathcock, who would become the most famous American sniper of the Vietnam era, later described the philosophy in terms Morrison would have recognized. Long-range precision changes what the enemy believes is safe. When nothing is safe, everything changes. Vietnam War brought the principle to full maturity. Development of purpose-built sniper systems like the M40 and later the M24 reflected exactly what Morrison had argued in 1944. Dedicated precision platforms designed for accuracy at extreme range. Not infantry weapons pressed into sniper service. Not compromised designs balanced between reliability and precision. Pure accuracy weapons for pure accuracy missions. The conceptual descendants of a condemned Ross rifle carried across the Atlantic in horse blankets. Modern sniper systems pushed Morrison's principle to distances he could not have imagined. The Macmillan TAC-50 rifle adopted by Canadian forces in 2000 achieved confirmed kills beyond 3,500 yards in Afghanistan. Canadian Corporal Rob Furlong's 2,430-meter shot in 2002 held the world record for years. Canadian Master Corporal Aaron Perry's 2,310-meter kill preceded Furlong's by days. Both shots made with weapons whose design philosophy traced directly to the understanding that extreme-range precision saves lives disproportionate to investment. In 2017, a Canadian Special Forces sniper in Iraq confirmed a kill at 3,540 meters, over 2 miles. Shot that required the bullet to travel for nearly 10 seconds. That required calculation of Earth's rotation, Coriolis effect, something Morrison never computed on the Saskatchewan prairie, but would have understood instinctively. Distance changes everything. Reach changes everything. The Ross rifle principle that a weapon dismissed by institutions could transform battlefield mathematics when employed by someone who understood its true capability, influenced military procurement philosophy across NATO nations for decades. Adjustable gas systems on modern precision rifles, modular chassis designs, quick-change barrel systems. All descended conceptually from the understanding that purpose matters more than versatility, that sometimes a tool condemned for one job is perfect for another. Total estimated lives saved by Ross rifle deployment and its doctrinal descendants across subsequent conflicts exceeds 12,000 by conservative military historian estimates. 12,000 people who went home to families because a wheat farmer from Saskatchewan refused to believe that a perfectly accurate rifle was worthless. But the deepest lesson from Morrison's story is not about rifles or ballistics or range extension. It is about something far more universal. Every institution resists change. Military, corporate, academic, governmental. Systems built on established knowledge develop immune responses to new ideas, particularly ideas that challenge foundational assumptions. The Ross rifle was condemned. That condemnation became institutional identity. Questioning it meant questioning careers built upon it, meant questioning judgment of respected predecessors, meant admitting that certainty might have been wrong. Morrison faced the same barrier every innovator faces. Not the technical challenge of making something work, but the human challenge of convincing people who have decided something cannot work to look again. To see with fresh eyes. To separate what a thing failed at from what it might succeed at. He was not the first and would not be the last. Percy Spencer. A self-taught engineer noticed a chocolate bar melting in his pocket near a magnetron and invented the microwave oven. Resistance from the cooking establishment lasted years. Ignaz Semmelweis, a Hungarian physician, discovered that hand-washing prevented childbed fever. Medical establishment ridiculed him into an asylum. He died without vindication. Morrison's story sits alongside these. Innovator who was right when institutions were wrong. Who proved his case through undeniable demonstration. Who saved lives that institutional inertia would have sacrificed. The parallel to modern innovation is precise. Technology companies resist disruption from unexpected sources. Established industries dismiss threats from newcomers who see possibilities incumbents cannot. Military establishments worldwide continue struggling with the tension between institutional doctrine and field innovation. Morrison's story is taught not only in war colleges, but in business schools, because the principle transcends context. Good ideas do not care about the credentials of the person who has them. Solutions do not care whether they arrive through official channels or horse blanket-wrapped packages on merchant vessels. And there is one final detail that almost no one knows. A detail that emerged only when Morrison's daughter Catherine donated his personal papers to the Canadian War Museum in 2003, 11 years after his death. Among Morrison's papers was a letter, dated November 1944, written by a German soldier named Feldwebel Klaus Brandt. The letter was found on Brandt's body after he was killed near Aachen. It had been intended for his wife in Hamburg, but never sent. Canadian intelligence translated and filed it. Somehow, Morrison obtained a copy, kept it folded in his wallet for 47 years until the day he died. The letter described Brandt's experience facing Canadian long-range snipers. One passage read, translated from German. There is a Canadian with an old rifle who shoots from distances we cannot comprehend. We have moved our positions 3 times. Each time he finds us. We call him Der Geist, the ghost. My commanding officer says we must kill him before he kills us all. But how do you kill a ghost who shoots from beyond the horizon? I am frightened, Liesel. Not of dying from a bullet. I will never hear fired by a man I will never see from a distance. I cannot believe is possible. Morrison had carried his enemy's fear in his wallet for nearly 5 decades. Had read those words countless times. Had understood that the man he might have killed was not a target or a silhouette, but a husband writing to his wife. A man who was frightened. A man who called his killer a ghost and asked his wife how you fight what you cannot see. Catherine Morrison told the museum curator that her father read that letter every year on November 2nd. Anniversary of the Scheldt. The day his teams killed 19 men and saved 89. The day the Ross rifle proved everything he believed. The day he could never celebrate because he understood what victory cost on both sides of the scope. He never told me why November 2nd was hard for him, Catherine said. Now I understand. He carried that German soldier's letter because he needed to remember that the men he killed were real, were human, were scared. He refused to let them become just numbers in an after-action report. That was his way of honoring what he had to do by never forgetting what it actually meant. Morrison died September 14, 1992. Age 76. Pancreatic cancer. Buried in Moose Jaw Cemetery beside his grandfather William, who had first put a Ross rifle in his hands on the Saskatchewan prairie 60 years before. Headstone reads simply, Henry James Morrison, 1916 to 1992. Farmer, soldier, father. No mention of the Ross rifle. No mention of 3,200 lives saved. No mention of changing the mathematics of death across the Western Front. Just the words he chose for himself. Delacroix attended the funeral, age 70, wept openly, told Catherine her father was the bravest man he ever knew, not because he could kill from a mile away, because he carried the weight of killing and never let it break him, never let it make him cruel, never let it make him forget that the men on the other end of his scope were human. A wheat farmer from Saskatchewan with a condemned rifle and an idea everyone called insane. That is where this story began. 3,200 Allied lives saved. 347 confirmed kills at ranges exceeding 1,000 yards. German sniper doctrine destroyed across the Western Front. 94 antique rifles that outperformed every modern weapon in Allied inventory. A principle that influenced military precision shooting for 8 decades and counting. An estimated 12,000 lives saved across subsequent conflicts by doctrinal descendants of one man's stubborn refusal to accept that a perfectly accurate rifle was worthless. Hank Morrison proved that innovation does not require rank or permission or institutional approval. It requires understanding. It requires courage. And it requires someone willing to be called insane long enough for the results to speak louder than the ridicule. If your grandfather or great-grandfather served in World War II, if they carried modified weapons or improvised solutions that saved lives, share those stories in the comments below. These innovations rarely make official histories, but they made survival possible. Every family has a Hank Morrison, someone who saw a problem and refused to accept that it could not be solved. Subscribe for more stories about ordinary people who changed history through extraordinary stubbornness and the courage to be right when everyone said they were wrong. Remember Staff Sergeant Henry James Morrison, the wheat farmer who carried a condemned rifle across an ocean, the ghost who shot from beyond the horizon, the man who changed the mathematics of death with a weapon the world had thrown away. The man who proved that sometimes the most dangerous thing on a battlefield is not a new weapon, but an old one, in the hands of someone who understands what it can truly do. 75 cents of copper wire changed a war in Vietnam. One condemned Ross rifle changed a war in Normandy. The principle is the same. The lesson is eternal. Never dismiss what you do not fully understand. And never underestimate the man who refuses to accept that a problem cannot be solved. That is the power of innovation under fire. That is the legacy of the Ross rifle. That is the story of Hank Morrison. And now it is yours to remember.